And without further ado, let me hand over to our moderator for this session, Mrs. Eileen Lach, a former board member of the Future Society and also former general counsel and chief compliance officer at IEEE. Besides Eileen, the panel also brings together Mrs. Elham Tabassi, Chief of Staff in the Information Technology Laboratory at NIST in the US, Sebastian Hallensleben, the Chair of the Joint Technical Committee 21 at the European Standardization Organization CENELEC, and Gary Hasselbalch, key expert in the InTouch AI initiative led by the European Commission and also co-founder of dataethics.eu. Eileen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Nico. It's really wonderful to see old friends and colleagues from IEEE and from the Future Society, and greetings to you all from New York. I'm very pleased to be heading up this panel, and I'd first like to introduce you to some of our experts. It's an illustrious panel who we brought together so that we can guide you through this important topic, moving from principles to practice with their international, European, and transcontinental perspectives. You, of course, can read their fuller bios in the program notes for the roundtable, but let me welcome our panelists. First of all, we have Gary Hasselbalch. Gary is the founder and co-director of the research in the European think and do tank dataethics.eu, which began in 2016 and has moved from looking at the ethics of processing data to an examination of AI ethics, and now specifically focuses on the distribution of power through AI systems and big data and the interests that surround them. She has been a research lead, she is a research lead and senior key expert for the EU's international outreach for human-centric approach to artificial intelligence, which I'm sure we're going to hear more about, and an independent advisor to the European Commission, among other entities and government agencies. I'd like to emphasize her independent consultancy capacity. Gary has said that the fundamental human rights of human beings is her only boss. Gary holds an MA in Communications and Cultural Studies from Goldsmiths College, University of London, and a PhD in Data Ethics from the University of Copenhagen. Sebastian Hallensleben heads Digitalization and Artificial Intelligence at VDE, Association for Electrical, Electronic, and Information Technologies, consulting on science, standardization, testing, certification, and application worldwide. There, he's responsible for new product and service development, as well as giving advice on developing frameworks for the German Parliament, various federal ministries, and the European Commission. He also has various roles in AI committees at IEC, the Council of Europe, and UNESCO, but most importantly, for a discussion today, he chairs CENELEC JTC 21, where European AI standards to support EU legislation are being developed for adoption by its 34 member states. He also co-chairs a classification and risk assessment working group within OECD, known as OECD 1.ai, which we've heard a little bit about. And he's primarily focused on AI ethics, on the handling of the impact of generative AI, building privacy, preserving trust infrastructures, and on AI quality. He holds a Master of Science and a PhD in physics from the University of Sussex. Elham Tabassi is the Chief of Staff in the Information Technology Laboratory at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, otherwise known as NIST, which is a part of the US government Department of Commerce. Elham's laboratory, ITL, is one of the 6 research laboratories within NIST. For over 20 years, she has been working on various computer vision research projects with applications and biometric evaluation standards, She is the principal architect of the NIST fingerprint image quality, which is now an international standard and has been deployed in many large-scale biometric applications worldwide. Elham has received numerous national recognitions for her contribution in biometrics, including the U.S. Department of Commerce gold and bronze medals, as well as the ANSI, which is the American National Standards Institute 2012 Next Generation Award. Also, and most importantly, for our discussion today, Elham was a member of the EU high-level group on AI, which developed the ethics guidelines contributing to the AI Act, which we've heard so much about, and is going to be part of our discussion today. Elham holds a master's degree in science in electrical and electronics engineering from Santa Clara University. So welcome to you all. What has been made clear in the preceding panels and throughout the roundtable is that for the most part, the approach to AI that has been taken in the European Union is one of enforcement through EU regulations, standards, and of course the AI Act, among other laws. While the approach in the United States has been to date primarily through the interpretation of existing laws by government agencies, exploration and implementation of best practices, self-regulation, and soft law. As the creation and implementations of AI tools develop at breakneck speed, how do we bridge these two approaches across nation-state lines? Is there a way to reconcile the approaches and achieve the use of trustworthy artificial intelligence within policymaking, the law, compliance functions, and the judiciary? As you can tell from their introductions, our illustrious panel are very well positioned to measure, evaluate, and assess AI at every inflection point in its life cycle and to explore coordination that is necessary across sovereign and geographic regions. During the course of our panel discussion, we would like you in the audience to dream along with us, to imagine a future and a future use of artificial intelligence in your respective policymaking, compliance, legal, or judiciary professions. Think about the following question. In the future, what applications of AI are in most need of measurement and assessment for trustworthy, reliable usage in the legal compliance and/or judicial context? In other words, what AI would you like to rely on professionally, but feel that you cannot, either because the trustworthiness is questionable or it doesn't exist in a tool that would be useful? Think about the 4 touch points of risk in assessing an AI system. That is, the data used at input to the AI system, the system itself, the use of the AI in a system, and the interaction of people with the AI system. If you have any imagined uses of AI in your professional life, put them in the chat. And we are going to, at the end of our discussion, have our panelists engage in a real-time assessment overview. Who knows, we might come up with something that's a real jewel that could be a white paper for the next Athens Roundtable. All right, so let's begin. In preparing for this discussion a couple of weeks ago, you had said to me, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. That seems to be the basis of your passion at NIST from what we've heard. But why do we need to measure and evaluate AI systems?
And thanks to the organizers, Nico, and everyone for inviting me and letting me to be here, including me in this program. If I may, I have a slight correction, I was not part of the high-level EU group, but at NIST we are leading the development of the AI risk management framework that pursue similar goal of the operationalizing values in AI systems. But yes, Eileen, as you said, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. And this is a quote from Lord Kelvin that's very popular among NIST scientists. As you said, a lot of us are very passionate about measurement at NIST. NIST has a long tradition of cultivating trust in technology and a long history of devising appropriate metrics, measurement tools, and challenge problems to support technology development. Measuring AI risks, as we heard from the previous panel, is really important, and it includes tracking metrics for trustworthy characteristics, social impacts, and human AI configurations. Measurement should include the rigorous testing, and there are already some good examples in other domains, for example, software testing and performance assessment methodologies, and with associated measures on uncertainty, comparison performance benchmarks, formalized methods for reporting and documentation test results that we ought to apply it to AI systems and AI applications. Why we need evaluations, what evaluations are good for. Evaluations strengthen research communities. They establish research methodologies and support the development of standards that can facilitate technology transfer and make technology more secure, more reliable, in other terms, more trustworthy, and all that can bring economic prosperity. Evaluations can promote the advancement of technological innovations, and as I said, that can advance economic prosperity. They can also create conditions needed for an informed trust or distrust in AI systems. So evaluation results can be used to provide information needed to whether AI system is in fact not only trustworthy, but also fit for purpose. Should they be trusted for the intended purpose? And to get there, we really need consistent design, meaningful metrics, transparent, repeatable, interoperable evaluations of real-world applications with real-world data. So I love your suggestions for the audience to put in the chat their use examples so we can look at them and look at what type of evaluation could advance trust or provide enough information to make systems trustworthy. And at NIST, we're looking at the benefits of the community evaluations to bear on the problem of constructing trustworthy AI systems. We have, as I said, experiences in evaluations that we can build the programs on top of that. These evaluations often begin with community input to identify potential harms of a selected AI technology in context, in a specific use case, and data requirements for evaluations. In terms of challenges in evaluations that you asked, a significant challenge in evaluation of trustworthy AI systems is that context, the specific use case matters. So previous evaluations, a lot of evaluation going on, take the system out of the context, put it into a test harness, put the data in, and measure the accuracy. But accuracy measures alone will not provide enough information to determine if the deployed system is warranted, is trustworthy, is doing what it's supposed to do, but beyond that, who is being impacted by the magnitude of the impact and what we can do about them. So in other words, accuracy measures must be balanced by the associated risk or societal harms that the system could have. And it's also important to note that the tolerance for error drops or should drop as the potential impact of the risk increases. And another again, building on top of that, another evaluations is the socio-technical aspects of the AI systems. So AI systems are a complex interplay of data, human, algorithm systems, as you mentioned. And when we are evaluating AI systems, we cannot get them out of that context, out of that socio-technical setting, and try to just evaluate them. And it's really important that the evaluations have the goal of, aimed at identifying risk and harm of the system before the systems are deployed. And to do the right evaluation, another significant challenge is to come up with the right data sets for evaluation, because we want them to be representative of the real world use context, and that is a challenge. I'll stop here, and I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. I wanted to interrupt to ask you everything that you've said about the systems and what's happening at NIST and these extraordinary challenges. Are a lot of these going to be addressed in the NIST risk management framework, which is due to be published in January of 2023? And is that going to be available?
Yeah, absolutely. So AI RMF provides, well, first of all, it's a voluntary framework. It provides a structured, measurable way to map, measure, manage, and govern AI risks. So through 4 functions of map, measure, manage, and govern, it tries to identify context, identify risk associated, and then there is one function, one activity completely dedicated to measuring the risks identified in during the map function, and those inputs gets into the manage function to come up with a treatment or respond to the risk that can be accepting the risk all the way to abandoning the AI or decommissioning the AI system because the risks are too high. In terms of when it's going to come out, yes, we had a congressional mandate to develop it by January 2023. We are on track. I want to give a shout out to everybody, many of them in this panel and attending the conference today, for the engagement, involvement, and really good input contributions towards development of the IRMF.
That's very good. Thank you very much especially for the congratulations to your fellow panel members here. Sebastian, I noticed that as I was looking at the NIST risk management framework, that it uses several factors of assessing trustworthiness. Very quickly, they are valid and reliable, safe, fair, and bias managed, secure and resilient, accountable and transparent, explainable and interpretable, and privacy enhanced. In reviewing that against your OECD 1.ai framework, which has been mentioned several times throughout this conference, it appears that the principles of a responsible stewardship of trustworthy AI that were adopted by the OECD in 2019 are in fact mapped onto the NIST draft. Is this the bridge to cross-border progress in coordinating the measurement of AI across the world? What do you think? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Okay, let's try this again. I wish I were better at lip reading. Nico, can you get someone to help us here?
Okay, maybe if I take
There
off
we
the
are.
headset. Great. Okay, I'll have a stern word with my headset. Right. So yes, but it's a very, very good question and very valid question. I would say it's one of many bridges that are needed, and to a large extent, the bridges are already informally in place because there's a lot of overlap in terms of the people who are contributing to the various efforts. Elham is very active in OECD and at the same time in charge of the NIST RMF work. And there are also many other similar overlaps that make sure that we don't have silos in the sense that people just don't know about each other. There's always someone in a committee that is also present in other committees and groups. There is indeed a broad consensus, and has been for a number of years, on the factors that are relevant when characterizing the trustworthiness and the ethics of AI systems. That is quite remarkable itself, but that emerged over the past 3, 4, 5 years, and so that provides the possibility to build those bridges. But the devil is actually in the detail. So one of those devils in the detail is terminology. So definitions of risk vary quite widely. Definitions of AI vary quite widely. Definitions of transparency, of fairness vary a lot. And so although there is consensus on the kind of broad concepts, as soon as you try and put them into more precise frameworks, you hit interoperability issues or areas where interoperability needs to be established. So the issue behind it is that many of the established frameworks go back to difficult consensus building processes themselves. And I'll pick 2 examples from the world of standardization. We have already 2 major schools of thought around risk management and standardization. So there's the community behind the ISO 31000, where risk is defined and understood as uncertainty. And there is also the tradition and the community behind the IEC Guide 51, that's the functional safety community, sometimes known as the IEC 61508 community, where risk is understood as the likelihood and the seriousness of harm. And each of these 2 efforts go back many years or even decades. There's a tradition, there's consensus building behind it, and they're not going to suddenly merge just because AI necessitates a much more integrated view. And so the OECD work that we do is not going to add yet another AI risk management framework, because it would just add to the whole group that is already out there. But rather, we decided quite early on to build kind of the overall bridge, the glue that is giving a company that's trying to make sense of all those risk management frameworks an entry point, and that also connects it to the legally binding instruments that OECD has got available.
Yes, could you clarify that for us? To what extent are the instruments of the OECD binding on member countries, and where the development of consensus building standards comes in? Will the standards themselves be binding for implementation leading toward interoperability, or where are we on that?
That's a very good question. I think it's not that well known that OECD actually does have a number of legally binding instruments, and the most relevant here is the due diligence guidelines for responsible business conduct for multinational enterprises that have been around for a few years, and they're currently being broadened to also reference AI and responsible AI risk management. And so we are in a position right now to amend this OECD legal instrument, and we do need to refer to all the existing risk management frameworks and connect them to this legally binding framework. If we look beyond OECD, for example, to Senelec and the standards there, they are not legally binding. That's a fairly common misunderstanding. They do have a special status as harmonized standards, because if you adhere to those standards, you're presumed to be in compliance with European regulations. So that's the presumption of conformity. But you can conform to regulation in other ways. It's just more effort, carries more risk, more liability risks. But the standards itself are voluntary, which I think is quite important.
Well, one of the things that you've also noted is that the OECD framework for classification is useful for specific applications of AI systems rather than generic AI systems. Can you tell us what that means?
Yes, it's a good question, and it really goes back to what are we actually regulating when we regulate AI? Are we regulating the system? Are we regulating the people who use AI or develop AI? Are we regulating the application? And many of the fine points that need to be regulated are actually very much on the application side, and they reach a little bit into the system and the operator side, so you can't really pin them down. So what the OECD framework for classification does is it provides a framework for all these aspects. So for the data going in, for the actual algorithm, for the task that is performed by the algorithm, for the impact that it has, for the people that operate it. And so whatever you want to talk about, there is a slot in the risk management framework that gives it some, sorry, the classification framework that gives it context and also gives it terminology. And therefore, you can use the OECD classification to take a given instance of using AI, to put it that broadly, and you can say, okay, right, according to the OECD classification framework, we can describe the model that is being used here as X, and we can describe the data that is flowing in as Y. We can describe the task that is being performed as Z. So you can map a specific instance of use of AI onto that classification framework, and I think that's one of the powers that makes it quite useful.
I'd like to go back to you, Elham. You had said in your discussion, or in what I've read with regard to the NIST framework, that the system is one that is not a compliance mechanism. It is law and regulation agnostic. Is that pretty much the same thing that Sebastian is talking about?
As long as he's talking about standards, I think so, right?
Yes.
So I think, again, regardless of the policy or regulatory landscape, the common denominators are going to be good technical standards that are clear, implementable, and as Sebastian mentioned, gets the ambiguity and vagueness about definitions, about the metrics, about what needs to be done out of the way. So what we are trying to do, again, with AIRMF is to provide those guidance, and we will work, and we have been aligned our document with current standards, and our intent is to be even more active and participate in ISO or other, IEEE and other standardizations vehicles to advance standards needed for risk management activities. In terms of compliance, it's not a compliance. What we meant by that is that we don't want to reduce it to a checklist. What we are really after is to promote a culture of understanding or intentionally understanding, communicating, and managing risks rather than just doing steps because to get the steps away. Risk management is a shared responsibility for all the actors involved across the AI lifecycle, and it's important that that they understand the responsibility and do it in a meaningful, thoughtful way.
That's actually really great news to hear about the hope and the attempt at coordination and the actual affirmative effort to do that. Now I'd like to look at a concrete example. Generative AI systems use deep learning models capable of generating synthetic text and images using natural language prompts. A couple examples are GPT-3, which was released in 2020, DALL-E 2, which was released in 2021, and Stable Diffusion, which was released just this summer. I'd like to ask what this one is for you, Sebastian. What are some of the challenges and measurements that are being used to evaluate these increasingly capable and accessible AI systems for their trustworthiness, or aren't these being done yet? And does this call for redefinition of what is trustworthy in evaluation systems, both within NIST and in the OECD?
Well, generative AI is both a fascinating and also to some extent, scary topic. And it's a genuinely
Scary?
new,
Did you just say
great,
scary?
I did say scary, yes, and I'll explain. And it's a fascinating breakthrough that has only really come onto the scene in 2018-19, initially with the emergence of deepfake, and then, as you just pointed out, GPT-3, large language models, and most recently, text-to-image generators. The use cases are, to some extent, very, very benign. So for online learning, for customer support, for example. In the creative arts, there are many very, very fascinating, also valid and good use cases. But there is also the downside, or the potential downside, that these technologies can be used to create and fake not only content, be it fake reviews, fake commentary, but also fake human beings. So if you can create images, you can create videos, you can create text, you can create bots. For the first time ever, you can create bots on a large scale that leave product reviews, that take part in political discussions. And we're really at a point where trust in the digital space becomes eroded, because you can't really know whether you're talking to a real person and whether the discussion you're having, the points you're trying to make, are really reaching a real person. And it's not so much an issue that individuals are somehow blocked from making their points in the digital space, but it's an issue of quantity where those points are no longer heard, because the attention is being soaked up by an almost arbitrary number of convincingly human bots. And the tools we have, so for example, fact-checking is not really scalable very well. User education falls down if the fakes are getting too good. And detection tools are in an arms race with fabrication tools. So it's a necessary arms race, but not a full one. So the generative AI as a new technology, as I said, is fascinating on one hand, but also poses some fundamental new risks. And I'm actually quite glad that we've got it on the agenda of the upcoming OECD ministerial later this month. And we'll be discussing in particular solutions that revolve around digital identities, pseudonymous digital identities, and also around building infrastructures and protocols of trust. So the frameworks that we have for AI risk management were conceived very much around AI as an algorithmic decision-making tool. In a broad sense, and that's what they're geared towards. And I think we need, in the refinement of the various frameworks that we have, we will need to have a closer look what possible additions, what extension do they need to also capture generative AI. As far as the OECD framework is concerned, it is actually quite broad, because it covers not just the system, but also the application and the tasks. So I'm quite confident that it is also well suited for generative AI. But yeah, as I said, there will be tweaks that will be needed over time.
I'd like to move a little bit away from the technical aspects to the societal aspects. One of the creators of these generative AI systems that Sebastian has talked about has characterized the technological diffusion as democratization of AI, indicating that radical freedom is necessary to achieve his vision of democratized AI that is untethered by corporate influence. I'd like to turn to you, Gary, because of your work, particularly in looking at influencers and data pollution and power, and your review of democratic systems, to ask you for your reaction to this statement, which possibly, using Sebastian's words, could be scary.
Eileen, and just to say that I was the high-level group member of the EU high-level group.
Here.
So, and also thank you for inviting me here. And I think we're really with this debate moving into the next phase of international coordination and negotiation of these norms that are so important that will guide what we could call a technological momentum of AI. And of course, also what we've seen throughout the day is all these global actors that are gathered around this task. It's really great. And of course, this next phase that I'm referring to is, of course, this implementation of trustworthy AI and the details of this. I really like what Sebastian said about the devils in the details, because right now, even though we're all agreeing on what's at stake, our human rights and the values that should guide the development, the democratic values, I mean, we have very different ways of implementing these values. And this is really what will make the main difference when talking about the impact of AI. But now to your question, I hope I understand it right, but I mean, I think that radical freedom as the way to achieve any kind of tool democracy can be a little bit of a problematic thinking. So if we look at the history of the World Wide Web, for example, I mean, and I like to look at these developments because AI doesn't come out of nothing. It's an evolution, and it's an evolution that builds on other technological evolutions. And I mean, thinking about the World Wide Web, for example, in the early 1990s, that came into being as this kind of cyber-libertarian imagining of this independent public sphere where citizens were free from oppressive state governance by this very decentralized and ungovernable, at least it was conceived like that, information architecture of the internet. And you probably all remember this Barlow Manifesto, a declaration of the independence of cyberspace. But of course, we've seen over the years how this digital space of independence is never really been free. It's always been and always was throughout the history of the internet and the digitalization of society. It was a space that was really occupied by very specific interests. So we have the commercial, we have state, we have even scientific interests that are not always guided by human rights and democratic values, even though we can agree that they're important. And I see this in this, I mean, in the same way in the context of this development and adoption of AI that we're talking about right now, and how to measure it and evaluate and the standards around it, that this is also a space of these competing interests where, I mean, AI for democracy is not only and it's not the primary guiding interest. So really a democratic social technical infrastructure for AI is something we really need to steer. It's something we need to guide, something we need to shape, and we need laws, we need standards, we need new forms of literacies with this very reflective approach. So radical freedom is not really the way I would talk about this. So now if this steering then also needs to take the shape of a much tougher governance approach than what we've seen before, then I'm all in for that, because what we really need to do now is to make sure that we do it right from the beginning. And this is where we can maybe bring in the EU's approach to AI that I think, and you mentioned also the human-centric approach to AI, the EU approach. And I mean, if we look at the AI Act, for example, I mean, we can say and we can talk about it in all kinds of ways, but one thing that is like important there and in terms of the entire approach is that high-risk systems, they're defined as those that pose significant risk to health and safety or fundamental rights of people. That's the primary interest guiding that risk, this risk-based framework. So we really have a really clear delineation of what is the primary interest that should drive the way that different conflicts between some of these interests that I talked about before, how those should be resolved. And this, I think, is really the most important contribution, like the symbolic value in setting that threshold to what is the primary interest. And that is something that, you know, we have to drive. It's not something that we can do without, without having some kind of steering and governance approach to it.
I'm afraid that we're just getting into the more profound aspects of what we wanted to take a look at here on the applications, but I see Nico is back on the screen.
Yes. I'm sorry
asking
to not be able to give you more time for this conversation. I want to thank you all. Thank you, Guru, Sebastian, Elham, and of course Eileen. And I hope that we'll be able to continue and deepen that conversation, in between this edition and the next edition. We have started already discussing some of these things yesterday at the European Parliament. So thank you all so very much.